You're listening to Talk Amongst Yourself, the solo space, where we pause, reflect, and get radically honest. I'm Kaylene. Someone asked me if I was over it yet. They meant well, but I'm not a browser tab, and I don't close that easily. What I want to talk about today is the grief nobody stays for. Have you ever experienced a breakup that feels like a death? Deaths that feel like the world could stop, but it doesn't? The loneliness of grieving after everyone else has moved on. People show up, but they can't stay for the after. And I have to remember my grief isn't their grief. At the same time, we need to understand that not everyone is on our timetable. We all grieve in different time and space. We can't expect everyone to grieve for a week, a month, a year. For some, grief is endless. I know it gets tiring when we see someone who is stuck in grief. I think we all have at least one person in our lives that is like that. It's hard not to want to yell, "Get over it already, jeez." I know it's hard to hit that like or that care button on Facebook. Believe me, I feel ya. However, who are we to honestly say anything otherwise? I am not them. They are not me. And sometimes I forget that my expectations of myself tend to bleed over, and I expect the world to be like me. Alas. You have to give them grace. And in the process of giving someone else grace, you need to give yourself grace. To be annoyed. But it is better left unsaid or unshared, if you know what I mean. Just hit the damn like or the care button and move on with your day. I'm guilty of those same feelings, but I do know not everyone grieves on anyone else's timetable. I had a breakup that completely felt like I was going to die. I thought that I was literally going to fall apart, that I was never going to make it. That breakup ended up being the goddamn best thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to grow in a way that I never would have if that hadn't happened to me. There were things in my past that I needed to face, and that breakup helped me actually face those things in my past. I didn't grieve on anybody else's timetable. It took me a long time to get over that breakup. I think it probably took me about 5 years to where I finally felt okay inside. And I know that that's hard to hear for some people, and it may be hard to hear for my partner that I'm currently with, but it took me a long time to get over it. And I was fortunate that I finally did, but I stopped sharing like those feelings and how I felt, with my friends because I knew that they would be like, "Jesus Christ, you're still not over it yet?" No, I wasn't over it. No. And it took me a long time to get over it, but whatever. It's something that I had to deal with, and it's something that I dealt with, but I did get over it. And I started thinking about deaths too in this. I have a friend, or I had a friend. Funny how I still talk about her like she was here. I have a friend. I had a friend from high school who died about 2 years after she graduated. It was like 1 year after I graduated. I was maybe 2 years. It was 2 years after I graduated, actually about 3 after she graduated. And to this day, that death still haunts me and I still think about it. And that was over, God, I don't know, 20 plus years ago. And that still affects me. And I still grieve for her. I still grieve for what could have been. I still grieve for her child who is now a grown adult living his own life and has his own kids. I just, that still bothers me to this day. I mean, it's not as deep of a cut as it was before, but it's still there. It's still very much there. And I have another friend that sometimes I talk to about it. And, I think we commiserate together, and we know that, that's something that will always bother us in some way, shape, or form. But again, it's grief, but it's grief that I don't always put out there for others to see or to hear because I just feel like I'm in my own space for that. I'm on my own timeline for that. And nobody can tell me that I should be over it or that I shouldn't be over it. It's my grief. I own it. And there is a loneliness I think that we all feel um when no one is around. And what I mean by that is, you know, we all show up to the funeral, right? We all show up to the funeral. We're all there for you. We're all there for you maybe days after, maybe a month after, maybe a little bit longer. But um it's hard to stay there with you in that because if it was somebody that wasn't close to us, we don't have and we don't carry those same feelings. And watching you go through those and go through, that type of death or those feelings, it's very hard on us too. But after a while, we kind of move on from that. And we don't really look back and we don't really know what you're feeling. Sometimes we don't even check. And I think that's just part of the human condition. And, sometimes you hear people say, Jesus Christ, they should be over it already. God, it's not like, their dad died a year ago. You know what? That is none of your business. If they're still grieving over their parent, let them grieve. Who are you to say we should stop grieving someone? I don't think you have any place to say when someone should stop grieving. And unfortunately, it's a part of life. I mean, I have to say, you know, it is hard not to yell sometimes, get over it already. That is so hard not to do. And I too share those sentiments sometime. And but I think at the same time I've got to sometimes smack myself a little bit and say, "Hey, that's their grief, it's not your grief." So, you know what? I hit the like and I hit the care button. I may not, fully understand it and fully be there for you, but it crosses my mind, that okay, this is their grief. And it takes me sometimes a little minute to go, okay, it's their thing. And sometimes, yeah, I'm fully annoyed by some of the stuff I see, but that's stuff that I keep to myself. That's stuff that I don't share with that person because man, that's messed up. Who am I to tell them to stop? And I think about work, you know, think about the bereavement time that is given to you at work. They give you 5 days of bereavement pay, for what could be a lifetime of grief. I mean, honestly, the absurdity of the workplace timelines for healing is ridiculous. It really is how we're expected to return to normal before we've even caught our breath, you know? Um, the emotional violence of rushing recovery, you know, getting back to work, I think that's the worst part of my job, when someone calls me and they're like, "Hey, I'm not going to be at work because my dad died or my grandmother died or, my wife died." That one I haven't heard and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to take that if I do hear that. And I'm supposed to say, "Hey, you get 5 days to bury your parent." Then you're expected to answer emails like nothing happened. That's insane. That to me, is maybe something that needs to be changed. Maybe we ought to have a little grace when that happens. Maybe we ought to give people the chance to grieve a little bit longer. I don't know. I just know that we can never downplay someone's grief because they're expected to be done in 5 days. How can you be done in 5 days? And especially at work, I don't push people in terms of, are you okay? Because sometimes when you ask somebody, if they're okay, you just started their waterworks all over again. And that's kind of hard to deal with because I know that when somebody does that to me, sometimes I just lose it and I can't help it. And it's nothing they did. It's just, it's a constant reminder all the time. But I think workplace, um, death and bereavement should be That should be overhauled in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I don't know how to change that. I don't know if it can be changed, but 5 days just seems absurd to tell somebody, "Hey, this is all the time you're gonna get to grieve," and I almost feel like it's cruel. You're expected to come back to work and work, or you're expected to take your days and split days, like, who knows how long it's gonna take. Sometimes it takes 2 weeks for a funeral to actually occur, and, I mean, I've seen people up to a month. But sometimes it takes a little longer than expected. How do you expect someone to come to work like the next day, or to come to work after 2 days of being out, and then they gotta hold those other 3 days, for a week or 2, and then come back to work and just do their work like nothing happened? That to me is, it's kinda cruel, and I feel like we can't really gauge that for someone. I don't know, maybe there's times when there's people that really weren't close to their parents and they can come back and they can, work like nothing ever happened, or, they're okay with what happened, or maybe it was an expected death and you're still going to be upset, but you can work. But sometimes if you're like me, I'm probably going to be at work because it's easier for me to drown myself in my work than it is probably for me to sit at home. And that's just something that I do. I don't know, maybe I would work from home, which would probably be something that I would do, because sometimes when I'm feeling emotional like that, I don't wanna face people. I don't wanna be around people. I don't wanna give people, you know, those feelings of that they have to comfort me, you know? And to me, I hate that, because when people feel like they have to comfort you, and maybe they don't feel like they have to, but sometimes you feel that way and you kind of get upset because you feel like they're not genuine. And I hate that part of it. And especially at work, that's really hard, because if you know someone who shows no emotions at work, and then all of a sudden they try to show emotions or show that they care, it's really hard because um you don't believe them. I know that that sounds crazy, but you tend not to believe people like that. And so when me as a boss, I try not have emotions. I try, to go ahead and keep my emotions in there, to let them know that I am human. I'm not a robot, and I don't run myself like a robot when it comes to work. But it's really hard sometimes at work, because I feel like we're not given enough time to fully grieve, that we expect you to be back at work and do your thing. Not everybody's like me. Not everybody wants to drown themselves in doing their work, so that they're not thinking about this 24/7. But there's got to be another way when it comes to our work. I don't know. I don't know what that way is. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to maybe change it, but I work for the government. So that should tell you something. Most of the government that we have doesn't care. Thank God I don't work for the federal government. They're even worse. But I don't know. I guess I just wanted to bring that part up, because that's another part of grief that I feel is tragic. It's a tragic thing that we do as humans. It's almost like we don't have any humanity when it comes to something like that, especially at work. It feels like for the company that the bottom line is all that matters, that sometimes people just don't matter. And it's always that way at work, because you don't matter in the scheme of things. Do you really matter? You're kind of just a number at work, and that sucks. I try not to be that kind of manager. I try not to be. But the bottom line is there are quotas to meet and there are things to do. It's not going to do itself. Anyway, so, I think it's fair to name your own pace. Letting grief be nonlinear, inconvenient, and letting it be sacred. I mean, really, the way that you grieve is honestly nobody else's business, and it's not a chore for them. They don't have to be there for you. That's okay. I kind of feel like, people are there for you in the beginning, and that's kind of when you need them, right? That's kind of when you need them because you're struggling. I mean, you've got to do things still. I think the worst part of it is when you're grieving, you've stopped. Your life has basically taken a hard break. But then you kind of realize at the same time that the world keeps spinning. And it's hard because you feel like, damn, why isn't the world stopping for this? Well, they're not you. They maybe aren't feeling what you're feeling. Maybe it was like somebody related to you and they don't have a clue who that person is. Even though they feel for you, they can't feel for this other person that they didn't know, or, the pet that they didn't know, or you know, it's just so hard. We're there for our friends. We're at the funeral. We try to be there for them, even sometimes after the funeral. But there's only so much we can do for you. And I think it's hard sometimes that we don't understand that, because you may have that one friend who will drop their entire life just to be with you, but sometimes you can't do that. You may not have the capacity or the financial means to do that, to drop everything and be with someone 24/7 or however long, you think that you're required to be there. But I think as friends, we try to be there. Even if we're not there physically, we try to be there in spirit. We try to let them know that, hey, if you need something, give me a call. And that's a really hard one when you look at somebody and you're like, hey, if you need me, call me. Most people aren't going to call you. They're not going to, you know, I don't know, they're not going to call on you. Let's just say when they're grieving. And sometimes it's like, but do you just show up? Kind of not, because sometimes you don't know. Like if you just show up and then they didn't really want you there, and then that's even worse. So I don't know how you reconcile with that. I don't know what you do in that case, but it's easier to say, call me if you need me, because if you call me, I'm going to be there. I'll figure it out. I may not be able to be there at 8 in the morning, but I'll be there by 3:30. I'm going to be there at some point in time when I can. And if I have to call into work one day, then I got to call into work and I'll figure it out. However, it's really hard because we are not on your timeline. You are not on our timeline when you're grieving, but it's hard for outsiders not to want you to be on their timeline, like to think, oh, you should be over it already, but in reality, I'm not healing on your timeline. I'm healing on my timeline. My world has just stopped, even though yours is still going. It doesn't matter. It's my timeline. Even though you're a part of my timeline, you're not a part of my grief timeline. I think that there's maybe separate timelines. Maybe we ought to call it for what it is. People grieve at different times. People grieve for different amounts of time. And who are we to tell them to get over it? Even though I know that it crosses my mind, but then I have to reel myself in like a fish and say, whoa, 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 Kaylene. You cannot tell people how to grieve. You just can't. Even though I'm like, ugh, and I give the proverbial eye roll behind the scenes, or, I'm saying out loud, Jesus Christ, get over it already. It's still not my place. So I keep it to myself. And so should you. Because it's not worth hurting someone else's feelings over that. But at the same time, it's not your business to tell them when to stop grieving or when to grieve. Everybody grieves differently. Some people don't cry at the funeral. Some people break down behind closed doors. And that's okay. Some people assume that you're not hurting because you're not crying. That's not true. That's not always true. For me, I was taught to be tough. So I'm pretty tough. I don't cry usually in front of people when I'm upset. And if I cry in front of you, woo, are you one of the privileged? But, maybe I'll cry when it comes to deaths. That's different. I don't know. I'm just saying that I'm not on your timeline. My 5 years of grieving over somebody who broke up with me was my business. If it took me 5 years, oh well, none of your business. I didn't ask you to be there. But at the same time, I'm not going to post about it either. That's just me. I'm going to keep that to myself because I kind of feel like it's my business. And sometimes I wish people would do that too, that they would just stop and, stop with the public displays of, oh, woe is me. Some of them I think are, oh, woe is me, but some of them are genuine. But at the same time, still, who am I to tell you not to do that? I am no one. So I would never tell you that. So do what you want when you want. And hell yeah, I'm going to hit that like button, that heart, or that care. I'm still going to do that. even if I don't really care, because it's the right thing to do. And it's the humane thing to do, which we are lacking. Humanity is lacking. We all know this. We all know this. So in the end, I think a little humanity goes a very, very long way. And you don't have to be a douche about it. You just don't. Anyway, if you're still grieving something that others forgot, me too. If you're still healing from something they think you should be over, me too. And that's okay if you're not over it. If you're tired of pretending you're fine just to make others comfortable, then you're not alone. Because I think we're all pretending at some point in time. You're not broken. You're awake. And it's the awake people that are going to matter. Trust me, in the future, it's the awake people that are going to matter, because we're going to leave the non-awake people behind at some point. Anyway, now this is real. I'll be back next Sunday. Until then, stay soft, stay brave, stay grounded as much as you can, even though it's hard to stay grounded some days. I have those days. I have those weeks. Hell, I just had a whole month where I couldn't truly stay grounded. But keep talking amongst yourself.